I guess this is the kind of thing people usually take to the grave. Or maybe they post it anonymously at 2 a.m. and hope strangers on the internet will somehow make sense of it. So here I am. My name's William. Not my real name, obviously, but close enough that I still feel a little sick typing it out. This happened about 8 years ago, back when I still believed I was a decent person who just made bad decisions. That's what I used to call them. Bad decisions. Like forgetting to pay a bill or lying to your boss about being sick. Not this. The short version? I ruined someone's life to save my own. The long version, the real version, is messier. It starts with a job I couldn't afford to lose, a mistake I absolutely couldn't admit to, and one coworker who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. His name was Daniel. And before any of this happened, he trusted me. I worked in a mid-sized logistics company, nothing glamorous, just shipments, inventory, and a lot of spreadsheets that no one double-checked as closely as they should have. I'd been there about 3 years, long enough to be trusted, not long enough to feel secure. That's probably important. The mistake itself wasn't dramatic. No alarms, no instant fallout. It was quiet, the kind that sits in the system, buried under numbers until someone decides to look closely. I authorized a shipment release that shouldn't have gone out. High-value electronics. The kind with serial tracking, insurance, and very little tolerance for oops. Except it wasn't an oops. I knew the paperwork didn't fully match. I told myself it was a clerical delay, that everything would sync later. Truth is, I rushed it. I wanted to look efficient. Reliable. The guy who gets things done. 2 weeks later, the shipment was flagged as missing. And just like that, my bad decision turned into something a lot heavier, something that could cost me my job, maybe worse. That's when I started thinking not about fixing it but surviving it. At first, I thought maybe it would resolve itself. Systems glitch all the time, right? Shipments get delayed, scanned in the wrong location, mislabeled. I clung to that idea harder than I should have. Then my manager called me into his office. He didn't look angry. That would have been easier to deal with. He looked careful, like he already suspected something but was giving me a chance to explain it away. He showed me the report, shipment ID, authorization code, my authorization code. I remember feeling this strange split inside me. One part of me wanted to just admit it, take the hit, hope for a warning, maybe a suspension. The other part, the louder part, was already calculating. How bad is this? That's what I asked him. He leaned back, sighed, and said, bad enough that we'll need to investigate internally before it goes any further. That word investigate did something to me, because suddenly it wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was something people would start looking into. Once the word investigation entered the room, everything shifted. It wasn't about fixing a system error anymore, it was about blame, responsibility, consequences. And I knew exactly how these things worked. They don't look for the truth. They look for the cleanest explanation. That's when Daniel entered my mind in a way I'm not proud of. We worked the same shift, sometimes overlapping access to the same system. He was newer than me, about 6 months in, and still figuring things out. People liked him. He was easygoing, helpful, the kind of guy who'd cover for you if you were late, which made what I did even worse. But at the time, I didn't think of it like that. I thought of variables. Who had access? Who could plausibly have made the call? Who wouldn't immediately trigger suspicion if something didn't add up? Daniel checked all those boxes. I didn't decide right away. I told myself I was just considering possibilities. But deep down, I think I knew. I wasn't planning to prove my innocence. I was starting to plan someone else's guilt. I wish I could say there was a single moment where I consciously chose to frame Daniel. Some dramatic turning point where I crossed a line and knew it. But it didn't happen like that. It started small, subtle, just thoughts at first, what logs looked like, how access records were stored, who checked them, and how often. I'd worked with the system long enough to know its blind spots. Not bugs exactly, more like gaps no one cared to close. That knowledge used to make me good at my job. Now it made me dangerous. I stayed late a couple nights under the excuse of helping with reconciliation. No one questioned it. If anything, it made me look responsible, like I was taking the situation seriously. In reality, I was studying everything. Login timestamps, authorization trails, override permissions. Daniel's credentials came up exactly where I needed them to, close enough to mind that, with a little pressure in the right places, things could start to blur. I told myself I wasn't doing anything yet. But that wasn't true. I had already started shaping the story. The tricky part wasn't changing anything, it was making sure nothing looked changed. People imagine hacking as something loud or complicated. It's not. Most of the time, it's just understanding how a system already behaves and nudging it slightly off course. Our system logged every action, but it didn't always lock them in real time. There were brief Windows sync delays between terminals, especially during overnight processing. I'd noticed it before. Everyone had. No one thought it mattered. Until I needed it to. I timed it carefully, waited until the system lag kicked in during a routine update cycle. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I expected panic. Instead, I felt focused, like I was solving a problem. I didn't erase my authorization. That would have been suspicious. I just added noise. A secondary access point. Daniel's credentials appearing in the sequence, not replacing mine, just overlapping enough to create doubt. Enough for someone reviewing logs to hesitate. Could be shared access. Could be a mistake. That's all I needed. Not proof. Just uncertainty. Once the logs were adjusted, I realized something I hadn't considered before. Evidence alone isn't enough. People don't just follow data, they follow narratives. And if I didn't give them one, they'd make their own. So I started talking. Nothing obvious. I didn't go around accusing Daniel or pointing fingers. That would have been reckless. Instead, I did something much quieter. I planted doubt. Little comments here and there. Hey, did Daniel ever mention having trouble with the authorization system? I noticed some weird activity on shared terminals. Could just be people forgetting to log out. Stuff like that. Harmless on the surface. Concerned, even. The kind of thing a responsible employee might say during an internal issue. The worst part. People responded exactly how I hoped they would. Not suspicion at first, just acknowledgement. A seed being planted. Oh yeah, I think he asked me about that once. Didn't he stay late last week? It didn't take much. Just a few nudges, and suddenly Daniel wasn't just around. He was part of the conversation, part of the story. And once someone becomes part of the story, it's hard to take them out. A week later, things escalated. R got involved. Then someone from corporate compliance. You could feel the shift in the office. Conversations got quieter. People started double-checking their own work, like guilt might somehow spread if they weren't careful. I played my role perfectly. Cooperative. Calm. Slightly concerned, but not overly invested. I answered every question, provided access logs when asked, even pointed out inconsistencies I knew would draw attention in the right direction. And it worked. I remember the first time Daniel was called into a closed-door meeting. He looked confused more than anything. Not scared. Not defensive. Just puzzled. Like he was trying to solve a problem he didn't even know existed. When he came out, he glanced at me. Not in suspicion, just in that casual way coworkers do. Like, hey, any idea what that was about? I gave him a small shrug. Played dumb. That moment stuck with me longer than it should have. Because right then, I realized something uncomfortable. He had no idea what was coming. And I did. At some point, the tone changed. Up until then, everything had been review and clarification. Neutral words. Safe words. But after a few days of digging, people stopped speaking so carefully. You could hear it in the way Daniel's name came up. Not maybe he saw something. More like, he had access, right? That shift, I felt it immediately. Like a current running under the surface. I should have felt relief. That was the whole point, wasn't it? The attention was moving away from me, settling onto someone else. The plan was working. But instead, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Daniel talking less during breaks. Sitting quieter in meetings. That easygoing attitude of his had started fading, replaced with this tight, confused energy. Like he was replaying every step he'd taken, trying to find the mistake he didn't remember making. One afternoon, he came up to me. Hey, will you ever get the feeling something's off, but you can't prove it? For a second, I thought he knew. I just laughed it off. Told him he was overthinking. And that was the first time I felt something close to guilt. Up until then, everything had gone almost too smoothly. That should have been a warning sign. Because real life doesn't stay neat for long. The first crack showed up in the form of a simple question from compliance. Not aggressive, not accusatory, just precise. They asked about terminal access overlap. Specifically, Why two credentials, mine and Daniel's, appeared within such a tight window on a system that usually logged activity more cleanly? I had an answer ready. Of course I did. Shared workstation, I said. Happens all the time during late shifts. People forget to log out. It was believable. Common, even. But the guy asking didn't nod right away. He just looked at me for a second longer than comfortable, like he was filing something away. That look stayed with me, because for the first time, I realized something dangerous. The story I built wasn't airtight. It didn't have to be perfect to work, but it did have to survive scrutiny. And now, someone was actually scrutinizing it. Not enough to accuse me, but enough to start pulling at threads. After that meeting, everything started to feel tighter. Like the walls were inching in, even though nothing had officially changed. No accusations. No confrontation. Just pressure. Compliance began re-interviewing people. Same questions, slightly different wording. Watching for inconsistencies. I stuck to my version every time, calm, consistent, helpful. But inside, I was running constant simulations. What did they know? What were they guessing? And then there was Daniel. He wasn't confused anymore. He was stressed. You could see it in the way he carried himself, shoulders tense, eyes tired, like he hadn't been sleeping. People had started keeping a bit of distance from him too. Not openly, just subtly. That's how it happens. No one wants to be near the problem. One evening, he caught me as I was leaving. "William," he said, more serious than I'd ever heard him, "they think it's me." I didn't respond right away. "They're wrong," he added quickly. "You know that, right?" And there it was. Not suspicion. Trust. I nodded and lied straight to his face. After that conversation, I told myself I needed to stop. Not confess, just stop pushing things further. Let the investigation play out on its own. But that's the problem with lies like this. They don't stay still. A couple days later, I was called in again. Different room this time. Smaller. More private. The kind of setting that makes everything feel more serious without anyone saying it out loud. They had a printed report. Highlighted sections. Timestamps. Access overlaps. And then they said something that made my stomach drop. "We're considering disciplinary action, but we need clarity on intent." Intent. That meant they were close, not necessarily to the truth, but to a conclusion. And conclusions need confidence. Daniel's name came up again. This time more directly. "Is there anything you've noticed about his behavior? Anything unusual?" That was the moment. I could have stayed neutral, shrugged it off, kept things vague. Instead, I hesitated just long enough to seem reluctant. Then I said, "I mean, he has been acting a bit off lately." That was it. Not an accusation, but it was enough. And the second I said it, I knew there was no going back anymore. It didn't happen dramatically. No shouting, no sudden revelations. Just a quiet announcement that Daniel had been suspended pending final review. That was the word they used, suspended. But everyone knew what it meant. His desk stayed empty the next day, and the day after that. Eventually, someone from it came and packed up his things into a plain cardboard box. No ceremony, no questions. Just gone. People talked about it in low voices. Shame, really. He seemed like a good guy. I guess you never really know. That last one stuck with me. Because they were right, but not in the way they thought. I should have felt relief. The pressure was gone. No more interviews. No more probing questions. The investigation had found its answer. Instead, I felt off. Like something hadn't resolved properly. Then, about a week later, I got an email. Short. Formal. The case was considered closed. No further action required. I remember staring at the screen, waiting to feel something definitive. Relief. Victory. Anything. But all I felt was this quiet, creeping realization. I had gotten away with it. And somehow, that was worse. You'd think getting away with something like that would feel like a win. It doesn't. At least, not the way people imagine. For a while, life just continued. Same job, same desk, same routines. People stopped talking about the incident. A new problem replaced the old one, like it always does. On the outside, everything was normal. Inside, it wasn't. It started small. Second-guessing conversations. Wondering how I sounded when I spoke. Whether anyone noticed anything off about me. Every casual question felt loaded, even when it wasn't. Then came the dreams. Nothing dramatic, no police, no arrests. Just Daniel, standing there, asking simple questions I couldn't answer. Or worse, looking at me like he already knew. I checked his social media once. Then again. Eventually I stopped, because it made things worse. Seeing someone try to move on from something you caused, it does something to you. I thought time would dull it, make it easier to carry. It didn't. It just made it quieter. And somehow, heavier. I've had 8 years to think about this. 8 years to come up with better excuses, cleaner justifications, something that makes it all feel less deliberate. There isn't one. I used to tell myself it was survival. That anyone in my position would have done the same thing if the stakes were high enough. That's not true. Plenty of people face consequences without destroying someone else to avoid them. I just wasn't one of them. That's the part that changed how I see myself, not the mistake, but the choice that followed it. I don't know what happened to Daniel after that. I never reached out. I told myself it would only make things worse, but if I'm being honest, I didn't want to hear what it cost him. If you're reading this and thinking about covering something up, don't. Not because you'll definitely get caught, but because you might not. And living with that, knowing you rewrote someone else's life just to protect your own, that sticks with you in ways consequences never could. I don't expect forgiveness. This isn't for that. I just needed to say it somewhere.